is okay, we're going to have a great conversation right now. You know, we are celebrating the 30th anniversary of Next Generation. We're also celebrating the 51st anniversary of the show that started it all. Right? We are also celebrating the 52nd anniversary of the filming of the second pilot, and this wonderful, inspiring, lovely gentleman who has been there since the filming of the second pilot is going to join us right now. Please give it up for the legend, George Takei. Indeed.
Look at this huge room filled with fantastic, dedicated, loving, intelligent Star Trek fans. Thank you, thank you. We have lived long and prospered. We've lived the longest and prospered the most. 51 years. I heard your introduction. We're celebrating many anniversaries, aren't we?
Yes, we are.
And yesterday we celebrated another anniversary, a birthday of a real president, President Obama. Let's give it up for him. May he live long and prosper.
When I introduced you, George, I used a lot of adjectives to describe you. Lovely, talented, articulate. You were also so inspiring, full of such positivity, and it is infectious. So we all thank you for that, because you are so positive.
Well, Star Trek is a very positive show, and of course, we all have to be positive, aren't we? Despite all the challenges that we have, we're very positive about the future, right?
We are going to stay positive about the future because we have to get there, don't we? And we can't just be inspired by Star Trek. We have to take action, and that's something that you have done a lot, especially over the last decade or so, since your Facebook page amassed 10 million. That is million followers. That is absolutely outstanding indeed.
Well, you know, as you said, we have to be positive about the future, and the future is tomorrow. And we have to do things today to make tomorrow a better day than it was today. And we do have a lot of challenges today, particularly coming out of Washington. But the thing to do is to see beyond and do what we can today to make that better America possible and overcome the madness, the craziness coming out of Washington.
Absolutely. You know, in so many ways, George, you have become like the physical embodiment of everything that Star Trek has come to represent over these last 52 years.
I'm the physical embodiment of me. Here I am.
But what I mean is just how you have taken, you don't just, you make things happen. You know, you've reached a lot of people. I mean, to have all these followers, 2.5 million Twitter followers, 10 million Facebook followers, and to have that reach. And going back, just for some perspective. So it's 2017, 20 years ago in 1997. It doesn't seem like that long ago. I mean, a movie like Titanic opened, and it just feels like just yesterday. Well, in 1965, when you filmed the second pilot, Where No Man Has Gone Before, it was only 20 years since the end of the Second World War. It feels just like yesterday. So to have an Asian on board the Enterprise, and he's just there. No fanfare, no sensationalism, he's just there. That was pretty bold for that period of time. And then for him to be on the bridge, constant presence, and joining the landing party in certain episodes, and making a massive presence in episodes like The Naked Time. But like when you were cast in that show, like what were your first impressions of people like Gene Roddenberry, Bob Justman, about just, we're putting an Asian on the Enterprise, but he's just there. And we're not going to make a big deal about it because in 300 years it won't be a big deal.
Well, that was Gene Roddenberry's vision. He was an amazing man. I had a brief conversation with him when I was being interviewed, and he said that television is a wonderful medium, but back in the 1960s, he felt that the medium was being wasted because the 1960s was a turbulent time in the United States. We had the civil rights movement going on. African Americans struggled for equality, which was being met with fire hoses and attack dogs and bull-headed sheriffs in the American South, but the same sort of thing was going on throughout the country. We had a Vietnam War going on, far off in Southeast Asia, that was tearing this country apart. Those who supported the war, as well as those who opposed the war, tearing this country apart. And at the same time, on a much larger worldwide scale, we had the Cold War going on. Two great powers threatening each other with mutual nuclear annihilation. And none of that was being reflected on television. It was just quiz shows, comedies, cops and robbers, cowboys and Indians. And Gene Roddenberry felt that television, really to be meaningful, has to reflect the realities of the time. And he found a way to deal with it. As science fiction, you can disguise the issues of the time and tell that story, and the intelligent audience will be able to see beyond the science fiction and say, oh, that's what is being talked about. People who are black on the aliens who are black on this side and white on that side who can't get along with people who are black on this side and white on that side. They know what was really being talked about. So Gene Roddenberry used science fiction as a metaphor for the issues of the time. And he said that the Starship Enterprise, which was where the story was going to take place, is a metaphor for Starship Earth. And the strength of the starship lay in its diversity, the many different people, many different talents, many different perspectives on issues, many different histories, all coming together and working in concert as a team. That's the way to move forward, not quarreling and fighting and warring against each other. He wanted to make that statement, but he made it metaphorically with the Starship Enterprise, and he cast accordingly. And it was groundbreaking for an actor like Nichelle Nichols, an African-American woman, and an actor like me, an Asian-American man, and at that time unknown that I was also gay, working as part of this team on the Starship Enterprise. And so I think Gene Roddenberry deserves the credit for that kind of message that Star Trek was trying to send. And I have great admiration, respect, love for the friendship I enjoyed, as well as his tutelage in helping me become who I am today. I think Star Trek, and particularly last year on the 50th anniversary of his creation, Star Trek, he needed to have been paid greater tribute. And thank you very much for that. He needed to be, and we all owe a debt to Gene Roddenberry. He died too soon. And the people that were involved with the making of Star Trek Beyond, which was supposed to be the 50th anniversary film, wanted to pay tribute to me, they said, by making Sulu gay, because I've been so active in the LGBT equality movement. And I said, no, 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 we've got to pay tribute to Gene Roddenberry. I think it's wonderful that now we can talk about the LGBT issue and make Sulu gay, but the real tribute should be paid to the man who created the entire Star Trek phenomenon. And they didn't listen to me. They went ahead And I said, Gene Roddenberry created all the characters as straight back in 1965 because that's the only way you could get a show on television. And so pay tribute to Gene Roddenberry's original creation and leave Sulu straight. He had a daughter, Demora. And so, that's Gene Roddenberry's vision. That's what we pay tribute to. But another way of paying tribute to the fact that he broke a lot of ground for diversity, create a new original character who has his or her own gay history. That's the way to pay tribute to Gene Roddenberry, not to turn something he created as straight into a gay character to pay tribute to me. Thank you very much for that, you agree. That's what should be done. And so I was really disappointed in the fact that I got backlash from some of the people that were at the helm of Star Trek Beyond, They said, oh, George is being preposterous. I don't think so. It's not preposterous to pay tribute to the man who created what we're celebrating for the 50th anniversary. Gene Roddenberry should be the one person who should be paid tribute to. So that's my response to your comment.
Well, growing up, when I first got into Star Trek, the first episode that I ever saw when I was 6 in 1974. Do the math. 6.
You were 6. And I would venture to say at least half of the people here weren't even born then.
Thank you for that.
Star Trek is older than you guys are.
But George, when I first saw Mirror Mirror, it was an atypical episode because it was all in the mirror universe. Sulu had that scar and scared the hell out of me. Spock was kind of scared.
I love that.
That's a great episode. But I was too young to appreciate episode. It was an action adventure series to me. I was too young to appreciate how Balance of Terror was a metaphor for Vietnam. How a private little war where there was a direct reference to Vietnam. How This Side of Paradise with the spores was a metaphor for the counterculture. I mean, I didn't get that. That's the brilliance of the show, is like, I sort of grew into those things and went, oh, wait a minute. But when you're working on the show, did you know when you sort of got the job that that's where it was going to go? Or did you sort of like discover along the way when you were reading the scripts and filming the episodes, I know what you're up to? So did it catch on for you, or was that clear from the beginning what Gene was going to do?
Well, as I said, when I was being interviewed, Gene set out told me what he set out to do. And so we looked forward to each script. And reading it, we knew precisely what he was trying to say. So, yes, we knew the metaphors that were being used by science fiction to address the real issues of the time.
My other question, and this is something that a lot of people don't realize. I mean, in this firm they probably do, but I wanted to ask you, a lot of people don't realize that the world's very first Star Trek fan, the first Trekkie, if you will, was Lucille Ball.
I'm not sure I would consider her a fan like you guys here. She was a studio head. And as the studio head, she made a good business decision. She was able to understand and see what it was. But despite the image of Lucy from I Love Lucy, she was a tough lady. I mean, she wore those padded, tailored suits. And when she came on the set, you knew the boss, the owner of the studio was there. And she was giving orders, or not so obviously, but do such and such and such and such, or get rid of that thing there, or whatever, She was in charge. But I wouldn't characterize her as a fan.
Right. But she championed the show. She believed in it. Yes. So.
But the real champion was Herb Sulu. He was a studio head, and
he worked for Lucy.
That's right. He worked for Lucy. He was her right-hand man, and he was a fantastic guy and a strong passionate advocate for Star Trek. And, I got to know him personally. Lucy is a difficult person to get to know personally, I found. She was the boss. But Herb became a good friend, and we've had, this is post our Star Trek, but we've had dinner with him and his wife frequently, and met with him in New York and London, and Herb was a good friend.
As far as getting, I know this is going to get a little inside baseball, but there are, in addition to Herb and Lucy, and especially GR, as they call him, Gene Roddenberry, the other Gene, the unsung hero, one of a few unsung heroes for the original series was Gene Coon. And I was wondering, how your experience working with the two Genes, what did you see as Gene Coon's strengths? What do you feel like he brought to the show?
Gene Roddenberry is the originator. He is the god of Star Trek. Gene Coon came on in the third season, and we were in trouble by that time because our ratings were very low. We thought, at the beginning of each episode, we put out the premise that we were off on a 5-year mission, boldly going on a 5-year mission. But our ratings were low the first season. And so we worked like the dickens to up the rating. And by that time, we had a core group of strong, passionate, dedicated, devoted fans. And they stuck with us, and we got a second season because of their campaigning. We were about to be canceled after the first season, but we got the second season. And even in the second season, despite that core group of fans, led by a woman named Bijo Trimble, a couple actually, John and Bijo Trimble.
Oh, we know the Trimbles.
Yes, they have been very active in fandom, and they're the ones that spearheaded the letter writing campaign. And yet, our ratings were low. But again, the letter writing campaign, so they gave us a third season. But by that time, Gene had other very tempting offers. And the offer was to go to MGM and do a feature film with a nice budget, much bigger than for Star Trek. And so he decided to turn the reins over to Gene Coon. And he was a guy who took over for the third season. And he was a tough taskmaster. But I would venture to say he didn't have the original metaphorical.
Fred Freeberger was third season.
Fred Freeberger,
yeah.
right. But Gene Coon, I think, didn't quite have the storytelling sense. I think the scripts that we got for the third season were not quite as dimension, having that metaphorical usage of science fiction that we had when Gene was at the helm of Star Trek.
The second season of the original series, it really sort of hit its stride. You had episodes like Mirror Mirror, Doomsday Machine, Amok Time, and just one episode after another was what we now see as a classic, has held up after all these years. That's also at that time when Desilu was sold to Paramount. And how did that sort of affect?
Well, actually, Desilu was bought up by Gulf and Western, which at the same time bought up Paramount. And so Gulf and Western decided, these were two studios that were right next door to us, and we had a fence, high, like the border fence that Donald Trump wants to build between Paramount and Desilu, and Gulf and Western tore down that fence. I think we should tear down all fences. Let there be people communicating with each other without barriers. And that's what happened. And we were delighted because the Desilu commissary was getting a little shabby. The linoleum floor was getting, there were black edges and holes in the linoleum, and there was a scent when you walked into the commissary. And Paramount had the legendary Café de Paris as their commissary, Art Deco room, and the founder of Paramount Studio, Adolf Zucker, used to dine there every day. And so, that was the legendary place to eat. And when the walls came down, we all rushed over and had lunch at the Café de Paris. But then they closed down the Desilu commissary, and they redid it completely and made it into the newest commissary in Hollywood. And they closed down the Café de Paris on the Paramount side. So we did finally become one studio, and we ate at the commissary that was closest to our soundstage, 30 and 31.
Robert Wise, director of West Side Story, Sound of Music, Star Trek: The Motion Picture. I feel like of all the films featuring the original cast, Star Trek: The Motion Picture has really aged very, very well. It got kind of mixed reviews. People they were expecting a Star Wars, but what they got was a 2001 version of Star Trek. And I love the motion picture. It's very theatrical. The effects are great. The music is great. The story is smart. What was it like to work with Robert Wise?
Well, we were excited to be working with Robert Wise. I mean, he was a legendary director of Hollywood. He edited Citizen Kane, that landmark movie. And as a matter of fact, that was shot at the old Desilu studio when it was called RKO Radio Picture. That studio has a long, long history. It was owned by Howard Hughes at one time, the eccentric billionaire. And then when he got the stock up real high for RKO, he sold it to a group of Midwestern businessmen who didn't know how to manage a studio, and its value came down. And that's when Lucy and Desi, who had a very lucrative TV show, comedy, I Love Lucy, bought up the studio and turned it into Desilu. So what was the question that we began with? I have a way of meandering in my response.
I love that about
the original point.
Because you're so well spoken. But I just was asking, did you notice it? What were the differences?
Oh, Robert Wise. Yeah. So Robert Wise has a long history at that studio where he worked on Citizen Kane, and of course you know that he did Sound of Music, West Side Story, this legendary director. And when we started work on Star Trek: The Motion Picture, he was not the kind of director that we often had as a TV series, because TV series go very fast. The pace is very rapid, and the directors, have to work fast, so they give commands and orders. Robert Wise was a quiet-spoken man, and he sat on this high director's chair, and he thought the scene from that chair, and the pace was very leisurely, which meant that we had a lot of wait time. Sitting around waiting. And I told Jimmy Doohan, I love acting, and I act for free. I charge for the wait time. And we wait long enough on this movie, so we're getting paid very well. Sometimes, we waited like almost lunchtime before we got any work done. Because he would be whispering to the cinematographer, or whisper to the first assistant, and this would be futz with, and that would be futz with. And then he would whisper with Leonard Nimoy, and there'd be other conversations. And Bill was one that got a little antsy with all the wait time too. But so it was a very leisurely schedule that we had. But the reason why he thought a lot was because we discovered that we had a special effects man named Robert Abel, who really was not able. We were having a lot of problems with the special effects. And about midway through production, Robert Abel was let go.
Right.
And so we went way over schedule, way over budget, and yet Robert Wise seemed very calm and collected. He didn't get flustered, which many TV directors did. In fact, there was one TV director who was so behind. We were shooting at about midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning, and he didn't have time to leave the soundstage to go to the men's room, which was outside the soundstage. And I caught him peeing behind the flats on the soundstage. That's how some of those TV directors, didn't want to get too far from the set. They peed on the soundstage, came back on the set, and then they were directing because we were so behind schedule. I will not tell you his name.
Yeah. I was going to ask you. You beat me to it.
I know I'd hear from him. The thing is, so many of the directors that we loved have passed from the TV series. And that director that peed is still alive.
Yeah, Star Trek 6 and Star Trek Voyager. Captain Sulu of the starship Excelsior. To do your own scenes on your own ship, separate from the rest of your colleagues, and then to return and do a TV episode for Voyager. What did that mean to you to finally just come to your own? Okay, yeah, I'm not on the Enterprise, but I am a captain of another starship.
Well, I'm an activist, as you all know, in the political arena, but I'm also an activist with my own career. And I've always been lobbying Gene Roddenberry, as well as the directors and the writers, to beef up. I mean, all the actors do that. Beef up the character that you're playing. And I was giving suggestions for Sulu having his own family and having relationships with others, But when you have 7 regular actors and a couple of Leonard and Bill were the stars, and so they were campaigning for more time in the sun as well. So it was very difficult to get with your lobbying for your own character. But I was always saying, Starfleet is a meritocracy, and how come they keep giving me advanced titles? I was a lieutenant. And then I became a lieutenant commander, and I became a commander. But I was still sitting at that same damn console, saying the same thing. Aye, sir, warp 3, What's the point of all these title promotions? And I said, that's got to mean something. The fact that we're getting higher titles. It's about Sulu was #1 in this Starfleet Academy graduation class. He was also the best helmsman in Starfleet. I mean, he's brilliant, and he should have reached his captaincy by the 3rd season. Thank you, the few of you who applauded. Oh, thank you all. You are an intelligent, wise audience. And so I've been campaigning for a captaincy for Sulu. I campaigned in Star Trek The Motion Picture, Star Trek 2, 3, 4, and when 5 came up, I quit campaigning because you knew who directed that. And I knew it wouldn't get too much further. There was no point in wasting time. So I quit campaigning. And then they announced that Star Trek 6 is going to be done. But I said, well, it's not going to happen. It didn't, I didn't campaign for Star Trek 5 and nothing happened. So I didn't campaign. But the script came and I opened it and I started reading, and on the front page, there's a brand new starship, the Excelsior, bigger than the Enterprise, more powerful than the Enterprise, and in the center seat, the captain of this big, powerful ship, a big, powerful new captain, sharp, smart, younger, and ready to go. Captain Sulu. And I read the whole script, and I said, undiscovered country? That's from Shakespeare. They're talking about coming back from death. No, that's not the right title for this one. It should really be titled Captain Sulu to the Rescue. You know the plot. That aging captain of the Enterprise is about to be blown to smithereens by the Klingons. And who would come to the rescue out of the darkened galaxy sky but Captain Sulu of the Excelsior? And he says, target that explosion and fire. Yes, blast the Klingons to smithereens. Thus saving the day and the life of Captain Kirk. And the classic ending of all Star Trek movies as well as TV episodes, on the bridge of the Enterprise, is the scene with the captain and the view screens. But this time, a humbled and grateful Captain Kirk looks at the giant image of Captain Sulu on the view screen, and essentially he says, "Thank you for saving my ass." And Captain Sulu looks down, smiles, and says, "Good to see you in action one more time, Captain." And he roars off, and there's an absolutely awestruck McCoy looking at the contrails saying, "My God, he's a big ship." But Scotty, with a twinkle in his eyes, says, "Aye, Captain, but not so big as that captain, I think." That's a Captain Sulu movie, right?
That moment at the end of that film that you're referring to, when that movie came out on December 6th, 1991. And
the day before Pearl Harbor.
The day before Pearl Harbor. Also the day before the anniversary of when the motion picture came out, because that came out December 7th in 79. But I digress. It brought me to tears because I knew it was the last movie, featuring the entire crew, and it was such a beautiful, perfect way to, like, the signatures and everything, signing off. Could not have really gone out on a better note.
It was a moving moment, wasn't it?
It really was. It was extraordinary. And I want, before we turn over to the audience, you are. I don't know where you get your energy. Maybe it's this thing. Whatever it is.
Green tea, lots of antioxidants.
But I want to ask you first about your exhibition in Chicago that they came for me. That's opening September 7th?
I think so.
Tell us about it.
In Chicago, they are having a major event, both an art event and a museum event. And they've asked me to come to Chicago and talk. I think this September something. What's the date? September 7th. September 7th. And I'll be speaking there. It's an exhibit on the imprisonment of American citizens of Japanese ancestry, simply because we happen to look like the people that bombed Pearl Harbor. There are still so many people that don't know this chapter of American history. Pearl Harbor was bombed, and this nation was swept up in war hysteria and racism. We're Americans. My grandparents came from Japan. My mother was born in Sacramento, California. My father Somebody from Sacramento, huh? And my father was a San Franciscan. Anybody from San Francisco? A lot more of you. They met and married in Los Angeles, and my brother and sister and I were born in Los Angeles. We're Americans, but simply because we looked like Japanese, we were rounded up by soldiers with shiny bayonets on their rifles and imprisoned in barbed wire prison camps. We were innocent Americans. There were no charges, and therefore we couldn't, challenge the charges in a trial court. We were simply rounded up and imprisoned. It might be interesting to note that we were also at war with Germany and Italy, but German Italians and Italian Americans weren't rounded up because they looked like the rest of America. We looked different. And so, purely on the basis of race, we were imprisoned for the duration of the war. And yet, despite that, young Japanese American men and women, when they initially, right after Pearl Harbor, young Japanese American men and women, like all young Americans, rushed to the airport, to the recruitment centers to volunteer to serve in the military. This act of patriotism was answered with a slap on the face. They were denied military service and categorized as enemy alien, which was crazy. We weren't the enemy, we were Americans. And we weren't aliens, we were born right here in this country. And yet they categorized us as enemy aliens. And then they came and rounded us up and put us in these barbed wire prison camps. And yet, a year into imprisonment, the government realized that there's a wartime manpower shortage. And so they changed their mind. They opened up the military for service by Japanese Americans, but they first wanted to ascertain our loyalty. Can you imagine? After they took everything from us, our home, our businesses, our freedom, and a year of imprisonment, they wanted a documentation of our loyalty. And one of the questions on the loyalty questionnaire asked a crazy question, a one-sentence question with two opposing ideas. It asked, will you swear your loyalty to the United States of America and forswear your loyalty to the Emperor of Japan? They assumed that we had an inborn racial loyalty to the Emperor of Japan, which was crazy. We were born, raised, educated. I mean, this was our country. But because of our faces, they assumed that we had a loyalty to the Emperor of Japan. So if we answered no, meaning I don't have a loyalty to the Emperor, that no applied to the first part of the very same sentence. Will you swear your loyalty to the United States? If you answered yes, meaning I do swear my loyalty to the United States, then you were confessing that you had been loyal to the Emperor, and now we're ready to forswear that existing loyalty and repledge your loyalty to the United States. It was insulting. It was outrageous. And many answered no to that. They expected a yes answer. They wanted us to confess that we had been loyal to the Emperor, that which would have justified the imprisonment. But thousands of young men and women answered yes to that outrageously insulting question. And they went from behind those barbed wire fences and they were put into a segregated all Japanese American unit sent to the battlefields of Europe, where they fought heroically. They fought with amazing courage and great sacrifice. And the 442nd Regimental Combat Team has gone down in history as the most decorated unit of the entire war. It's an amazing story. We built a museum in Los Angeles called the Japanese American National Museum that tells that story. And currently we have two exhibits. We have three exhibits. We have a permanent exhibit that tells that story, but another exhibit that's limited, it's closing soon, that deals with the executive order that Roosevelt signed to put us into these prison camps. And the museum, I'm a former chairman of the board of the museum and a current trustee, but they came up with the idea of telling the story of the Japanese American experience in terms of my life. An exhibit on George Takei, which was very flattering, but really, I had nothing to do with it. But I was in prison, and that's one chapter of American history. And then I had a struggle to build an acting career. And then I had another struggle because I was closeted for most of my adult life. I'm gay, but I passionately loved my career, and I couldn't have my career and let it be known that I was gay. So I was closeted through most of my career. Although my friends on the Star Trek cast knew, I didn't tell them. But, actors are very sensitive, sophisticated people. The first time I knew that they knew was in the morning when we gather, we get made up, and then we go to the coffee urn and sip coffee. And I was standing there sipping coffee with Walter Koenig when Walter suddenly started making the sign, urging me to turn around, look behind me. So I turned around and looked, and here were a bunch of young male extras coming in who had just been handed their, or were wearing their costume, Starfleet sweatshirt. And one of them was a drop-dead gorgeous young guy. Really built, his pectorals pushing at that Starfleet uniform, and my heart stopped. And then I realized it was Walter that told me to look around. So I turned around and looked back, and there was Walter smiling, and he went. So I knew they knew. And Jimmy knew, and Michelle knew, Leonard knew. There was one that went right over his head. You know who?
On that note, let's take questions from the audience.
Okay,
let's start over here. You have a question. What's your name and what's your question?
My name is Therese Sumie Yasukochi Gerlach. My grandparents were both imprisoned. My grandfather was part of 442. That's not what I came up here to tell you.
Oh, but thank you for sharing that.
My cousin, who is in college right now, is doing she's preparing something for her school. And her research is on how the imprisonment affected the generations beyond.
Okay, but I'm...
So I was wondering if you had something to say about that. I also wanted to thank you for your advocacy and your strength and your power. I follow you. I think you're extraordinary. And the other thing is, would you and Bradders like to adopt me?
Well, taking your last question first. Yes, we would love to adopt you.
Thank you. I'll be back on Tuesday. It's my treat.
The important decisions are made by the better half, and I will talk to Brad about that. But I'm sure you'll agree. We have a new daughter. Thank you. The other parts of your question, well, thank you for sharing with us your family history. Your grandfather fought with the 442nd, and they are really my heroes. They are incredible. I just finished a picture titled American, in which I play a veteran of the 442nd who is a volunteer at the Japanese American National Museum. And I had to age, the character is 93 years old. I am 80 years young. And every morning, I had to go through this aging makeup. Believe me, it ain't easy to age 13 years more. I told them I can do it with the power of my acting, but they insisted they're gonna have close-ups, and they wanted to see the wrinkles. This bruiser of a guy would hold my skin taut like this, and the makeup woman would dab liquid latex, and then powder it, and every cell of my skin starts to pucker with that powder, you know, and it's being held taut like this. And then she takes a hair dryer and blows on it, and it gets tighter and tighter. And when it's completely dry and tight and solid, she tells him to let go, and he let goes, and bam, the rubber contracts, and my skin just crumples, and my eyes tear. My eyes were teary until about 12 noon, and it really does make you look 13 years older. And it's about your people like your grandfather, who is paying tribute to so many who passed on those battlefields, and that's why he's volunteering at the Japanese American National Museum. It'll be the makers of the film are going to try to have it ready for Sundance in January. So look for that picture. And thank you very much for sharing your family story.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, in case you hadn't noticed, this gentleman has a lot to say about a lot of things. So make sure you follow him on Facebook, on Twitter, and join George tomorrow. He'll be back on this stage for another panel that he will be flying solo on. George Takei, thank you so much, my friend, my lifelong friend. You are family. You are. George Takei, ladies and gentlemen.